guys, it's Sam, and this is my spoilery discussion of The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. As I said, this video will have spoilers in it, so if you have not read this book, go ahead and check out my spoiler-free review, which will be linked on the screen. Now, this is neither a gush nor a gripe, because I didn't feel like either one really represented my feelings on this. I don't have overwhelmingly positive or overwhelmingly negative things to say about this book. I'm very happy to discuss this book because I know it's like all the rage right now and people really want to talk about it, but I couldn't categorize it as one thing or the other because I gave it a fairly even middle-of-the-road rating. So like I mentioned in my review, I liked this world that we were presented with, this world of fairy, and I felt like it was this kind of dark whimsy, but not as dark as some other things that I've read. As many of you know, I've gotten more into more Eastern European fairy tale folklore things, and I feel like that has a darker take on like fairy tales and magic and stuff than this does. This feels more classic dark, if that makes any sense. I described it as feeling like an animated movie in my review because that's kind of how I feel. Like all of those little like beings and hobgoblins and all of those things like all together feels just like more eccentric, eclectic, like a magical circus almost. Like it has a different feeling than a lot of these other more like darker fairy tale feels. And I mentioned this in my review as well, but I am seeing so many people being like, oh, this is so different because the Fae are mean. And I'm like, the Fae are always like this. Like, the Fae are known for being mischievous and to, like, pull tricks and pranks and be, like, mean and twist your words against you and twist, like, your promises against you and your wishes and stuff. Like, this is a Fae trope. So, them being cruel is nothing new. Actually, Fae being nice is a fairly new revelation and a new idea. Like, especially even all of the books that are really popular right now about some of these Fae stories that are coming out, like ACOTAR and Enchantment of Ravens and all those Fae, maybe not the ones that you're like right in connection with, that the main character's in connection with, but all the surrounding Fae are depicted as bad and mean. Like, this is not new. So this whole like, oh, it's so revolutionary, like, no, this is just how the Fae are. So one thing I really liked about this book is the discussion of like parental relationships. So when you have Maddox at the very beginning killing Jude's family, you know, and then he becomes his father figure, I really liked this like dynamic and how she keeps saying that like he raised her and he taught her to be kind of like a strategist, which I didn't really get in the beginning. Like I didn't feel that in the beginning. It gets brought up a lot in the like end especially, but in the beginning it's like I didn't really get that, and that was what I talked about in my review as far as like pacing and consistencies and stuff. I felt like this book was fairly inconsistent with some of its stuff, but I still liked this like theme of these parental figures that aren't really her parents, and she loves Maddox but she doesn't want to because he killed her family, but that's kind of just what he does, and so she loves him and she loves Fairy, but she shouldn't because she's human, and Vivi doesn't love Fairy, but she should because she's Fae, and all of that. And even the things that we get revealed about like Oriana and how there's like more to her than you originally think, and then how she kind of more raised Taryn, which again isn't mentioned until later, and I mentioned in one sentence, and I'm like, what? Like, so Taryn's more her student, but okay. But even when more things about her personality get revealed and you know that she's been like a part of the court before, so like her behavior then makes more sense. So that was cool. But I just liked this like family dynamic thing and being really torn because you love something but you shouldn't because you don't really belong here, but you feel like you do, and all of that. Like that throughout the story was really strong in my opinion. So like I touched on already, like the inconsistencies were weird for me and just like always kind of threw me a little bit off kilter. So I mentioned in my review that I feel like the pacing of this book is off and that the book feels vastly different at the very beginning than it does at the very end. Most people are going to be like, that's how books are supposed to be. I know. I read a lot. So what I'm saying is it's that in a bad way. So it felt like these characters changed too quickly, or things were revealed without foreshadowing a lot for characters and for plot, which I just, no. Like you can do this better by foreshadowing it a little bit and then I'm going to really like it, but with this I just didn't have that. So in particular, I felt like Taryn and Jude's relationship was so different from the beginning versus the end, and that just felt like wrong to me. That felt off. Like Taryn's personality felt off because at the beginning they feel like so bonded and not much time has passed or anything. It's not like something's happened to like unlink them, you know? And then at the end it's like Taryn's betraying her. She's with Locke and she's been with him the whole time and she's betraying her sister for this guy, and it just like, that doesn't feel like the character we've been introduced to. And since it hasn't really been foreshadowed to, like really, it doesn't feel right. Like there's this disconnect there in my head. Speaking of Locke, I knew something was kind of off with him from the beginning, so reveals about him didn't feel like very interesting. At first, what I first thought was that he was actually going to be the prince, and that Carden was a like look-alike stand-in, kind of like he was raised as the prince to throw people off the scent, and that Locke was the real prince, and so like all of that is what I thought was going to happen. And then it's just kind of like, oh, it's just he's mean via like manipulation and like drama. He just likes drama. And that was something that I wasn't really expecting out of the book. Like I said in my review, I get that it's a cruel prince, but I was expecting a much more like detached, cold cruel, and not so much of like a targeted aggressive behavior from like the clan of bullies. Like that was just, I don't like reading bully stories. So when they're like forcing her to eat fairy fruit and then like run around naked and like just making her almost drown and all of this stuff, it's just like, it's so over the top, and I just don't like reading like about mean girls and like mean boys. I just don't like that. And on top of that, at the very, like towards the beginning, when you see that Carden is being beat by his brother and like that's his whole reveal, I really didn't like that, because I feel like it's at a point in the story where you can kind of start to like explain away his behavior, and I'm like, although I get that that's a reason that he's the way that he is in some ways because they're all cruel and everyone's cruel to one another and we're so cruel, it just was like, oh, I don't want anyone to like excuse this behavior because like, oh, his brother beats him, you know, like, and he doesn't fight back and all this stuff. Like, so I think that was just like a poor placement of that event. And then in that same like scenario when she's sneaking around, I feel like in that middle chunk when she's supposed to really be having her like spy training and being a spy and stuff, we didn't get like a training montage, and I feel like we needed one for this book, because you have a lot of time spent at the beginning with the bullying and all the emphasis on that, and then you have all the stuff at the end, and the middle is just like the absence of the bullying and just like nothing quite happening but being like, oh, she's turning into this super cool spy, and it's like I would have liked to see the mission she was going on and some camaraderie building with like the group, because at the end you have some of that like banter, like she has a little bit of like training with Ghost, but you don't really get to see a ton of it. I feel like we needed that to really like see how badass she's getting and see her change, instead of it feeling like this like really quick turnaround progression for her. That's why the personality felt like a little off. And also, the whole thing when she steals the human servant came out of nowhere, and it was so dumb, because it's like, okay, she's supposed to be this big strategist and whatever, and then she takes the servant when she knows that she's doing it, that like, this is gonna get me caught, this is gonna get me in trouble, blah, blah, blah. So it's like this whole thing where you're like, oh, Maddox taught me to be such a good strategist. It's like, well, obviously not. There was no foreshadowing about her like even caring about the other mortals. Like, she doesn't really mention it before this happens. Like, we have this whole stuff with like Vivi caring about mortals and hating Fairy and all this stuff. You don't have Jude having that. She doesn't hate Fairy. She kind of looks at the mortals and she's like, oh, that sucks. But like, she doesn't really, like, she's not really thinking about it. It's not tearing her up. So when she just suddenly is like, I'm gonna take this girl, it's like, what? This doesn't really go with your personality. Why? Why would you do that? You're, you know, turning yourself into a weapon, you're being the spy, you know that like, you know, these people are cruel and the royalty's bad and all this stuff, but you're like, still doing it. It doesn't make any sense. It's just a waste. So this consistent lack of foreshadowing with a lot of these character personality reveals was just a little much and made it feel a little messy. Between that and the like numerous threads and stuff that I feel like were thrown in there, which I think are probably like thrown in for the future of the story and for the foundation building. So like Valerian cursing her and stuff like that, like that's all going to be a thing. But it's just like there was so much time spent on some of these things when I was like, I want more time spent on the stuff at the end. Like that is what I want more time spent. I want more time spent in the like spy stuff. Like, and we spent all this time in these other places that I just didn't feel like we needed to. All this time spent with Locke, when you're like, you know that she's not going to end up with him, that there's something like wrong with him. And also like this weird, like, why is he bringing her around all his friends that are horrible to her and he's not changing their behavior? Like, why does any of this relationship make sense? So you're just sitting there like, when are we going to get to the point where he like betrays her or something? Because we know that's going to happen. So that just felt like a little obvious, and so we're spending all this time on stuff that I just felt like wasn't really as necessary as some other parts that were spent like with very little time. So a lot of people said that they felt like the book got better about halfway through and they really started liking it. I think it was like more like 60 to 70% of the way through. That's when I started really liking it. More like 70 to 75, and that's when it started like to really pick up for me. But even so, we get to the big Carden reveal, because again, you have him a lot at the beginning and then you have this whole lull, and then you have him a lot at the end. And it's like, for a book titled The Cruel Prince, like, my expectations, even though I didn't know enough about the synopsis or anything before I went into this, I didn't watch any reviews, I didn't do anything, my expectation of this was more that it was going to be focused around him, and most of it it's not, really. So I was like, what? So I was even expecting more, like, hate to love banter, all this stuff, and you just really didn't get that, and I know that was my own expectations, but it's like, from the way everyone was talking about it, was like, oh, it's so good, there's my book hangovers and blah, blah. I was like, there's gonna be more stuff with him, and there really, like, wasn't. So that was an interesting side note. But anyway, when you get the reveal that he's been mean to her all this time because he's, one, jealous of her, which is just, like, kind of weird and out of nowhere, and because he likes her. No, I feel like no, like, and that just feels very juvenile to me, like, he was picking on her because he liked her. No, and that's why I think that the whole targeted bullying thing was done wrong. I think that it would have been, even that explanation would have been far better if it would have been, he was cold, indifferent, ignored her because he was above her, stuck his nose up at her, and was like, you're below me, you know, but wasn't aggressively targeting her, like his friends are trying to kill her, all of this stuff. That makes it much more of a problem for me, because it's like you're seeking her out and being aggressive and mean to her because you like her, and because you hate that you like her. No, I think this whole, like, indifference, I don't want to be around you, that would be better. And it's like, well, I turned away from you because I couldn't handle my emotions towards you, and I didn't like that I was drawn to you, so I kept you far away from me. That feels better to me. That feels more believable to me. That feels like it's not making excuses for, like, cruelty of, like, an aggressive sort. And it just feels more mature and complex and fleshed out, because some people are gonna be like, don't you love hate to love romances? Yes, but I love hate to love romances that are more like, you start out not even really knowing each other and just being kind of indifferent, then you're forced together and you butt heads and you have, like, banter and that kind of, like, hate, and then you start seeing more in one another. I like those types, and this doesn't really do that. It's like, I bullied you and my friends all bullied you, and then now that I'm separate from them, we're sort of a team. And again, this will kind of evolve and whatever, but it's not a path for hate to love that I really like. It's a path that I think has more problems with it. So I think the other way of, like, indifference, looking down on her, and, like, not much interaction and action to the cruelty would have been far better for this, like, I was mean to you because I had a crush on you, than the, like, outright bullying. So I started to like the banter and stuff and this, like, teamwork, but I just didn't feel like the payoff was as good. So, like, the kiss didn't feel like a payoff to me, because again, we have this whole lull where he's really not in it that much, and they don't really have a ton of that. So I am excited, though, for the future of the series. I think the series is going to get better. I don't feel like this is a groundbreaking first book. I feel like this is a foundational book. I don't feel like it's doing anything different with the Fae, or even with this, like, hate to love relationship. I mean, this is just like a bully thing. This is not new. I mean, girls been being told that guys are like them because they're mean to them forever. This is not new. So I don't think that this is groundbreaking. I was not in a book hangover because of this. I believe that plenty of people were. I just wasn't, and I expected more out of it based on everyone's, like, overwhelming hype of it. I don't necessarily think that the hype completely got to me, but I had different expectations because of it, and I think there's things that could have been changed around that would have made me, like, absolutely love it. But I am looking forward to the rest of the series. I like now that, because I thought, like, there's no way that Oak's gonna get away and that whole thing's gonna happen. He has to, so them being, like, stuck as teammates with him on the throne, and her being, like, dubbed the queen by the, like, spy people and all of that, like, that's gonna make for really good series material, really good angst, and just juicy, good political intrigue stuff. I think that's going to be really good. But as far as this first book, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. It didn't blow me away. The ending was better than the rest of it, but it had some flaws for me. But I think that the rest of the series is just going to go up from here for me. So comment down below, let me know what you thought of The Cruel Prince. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon.